Hey all, so here we are, day 4 of Unit 2. We're going to continue talking about some of these big rebel rouses we've talked about. We left off last class with John Wycliffe and John Huss, who both end up being declared heretics and basically were enemies of the church. Today we're going to pick up with these two guys right behind me here. This guy right here, Martin Luther, and this guy, John Calvin. So we have some more reformers that we're going to talk about today. So why don't we just jump right on in and find out what they did. All right, so we'll start with Martin Luther. Martin Luther he was born in Germany in 1483. He came from a very poor family, but his father was determined to have a son that would honor the family name and do well for himself. So he ends up sending Martin off to law school when he was a young man. And one day when he was walking home, he was coming back to school, he was about 21 years old, there was a lightning strike that occurred near him, and he cried out, and he was like, "Oh, God, save me! I'll do anything, just save me, and I'll become a monk." So he stayed true to his word, and he ended up becoming an Augustinian monk because he survived the storm and wasn't struck by lightning. Well, while he was there at the monastery, he decided that he was going to truly devote himself to God. So he dedicated himself, he devoted himself to fast, long hours in prayer and pilgrimage, and constant confession. But the thing is that the more he tried to do for God, the more he felt like a sinner and that all the stuff he was doing just wasn't cutting it. So he ends up searching for a way to please God and have more of a meaningful relationship with him. It seems strange that someone who had committed his life to serving God and the church ended up rebelling, right? Well, not really. So let's take a look at why he rebelled. But before we do that, I need to make sure you understand what it is that he actually believes. So Martin Luther had a very different view of God than most others in his time, which is actually what makes him a rebel. So although he viewed himself as a restorer and not a rebel, he ended up stirring the pot big time. So he believed that in order for one to be saved, you did not have to follow these specific practices like praying cycles of the rosary or not eating meat on Fridays, but rather that salvation came through faith alone. Okay. He believed that the Bible should be the sole religious authority in a person's life and not the text and not the Pope. So he thought that everything that God requires us or wants us to do or requires from us is shown to us in the scriptures and not through the authority and tradition of the church. He also thought that all people with faith were equal and that there really was no need for a priest to interpret the Bible for them. So what is it that had him so upset? What was it that he opposed so much? Well, a major issue he had with the church was the sale of indulgences. Now, an indulgence, if you remember your definition, it is a donation, quote unquote, to the church in order to be forgiven of sin. Luther made his disagreements known in 1517. There was a guy, he was a friar of the church. His name was Johann Tetzel, and what he was doing was he was taking all of this money that the church was making off of the sale of these indulgences, and he was taking it, and what he was trying to do was he was trying to rebuild the St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome. So he's taking this money, and this is what he's telling everybody he's doing, but actually all the money's not quite always going there. So he ends up kind of tricking people into believing that they are able to buy their forgiveness, okay? And this gets Martin Luther like super upset. So Luther is so upset that he ends up on October 31st in 1517. He had written out 95 theses and he nails it to the church door. And I don't mean like he just kind of sneaks up there in the middle of the night and like taps it up on the door. No, he walks up there in broad daylight and like has this big old piece of paper. And so he walks up there and he just nails it up on the church door. And it's like, look, these are the issues that I have with the church. And he didn't list them out exactly what the issues were. But instead, these were 95 statements that he was ready to argue and ready to debate with the church about why the whole sale of indulgences and all the other corruption that he felt like was going on in the church at that time was important to be discussed. So, now that these 95 theses are out here, this is a big deal, right? He's done this in broad daylight, right out in front of everyone. His 95 Theses, he basically calls the church out on all of its corruption, sale of indulgences, it causes a really, really big stink for these people. So, sorry, let me give you what you need to have in your notes there. Nails them to the door of the church. The way that he gets his ideas across, remember the printing press? We've talked about that. So what the printing press does is, they start making copies of these things left and right. So it gets out there, people are reading them, and they're like, hey, yeah, wait a minute, this is not quite right what's going on in the church. All right, so what happens to him? Because he's made this big stink. He's ruffled some feathers and upset some pretty important people. So now what? Well, he's going to have religious consequences, and there's also going to be political consequences as well. So Luther is going to, as far as the church goes, he's given the chance to recant, meaning that he gets the chance to take it back, in other words. They're like, oh, I didn't really mean it. I was just kidding. But that's not what happens. The Pope actually threatens Luther with excommunication, which is when the rights of a person to participate in the Catholic Church are taken away. Luther refuses to take it back. So Pope Leo X had no choice but to excommunicate Luther from the church. Now, politically, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V had summoned Luther to the town of Worms, to the Diet. Okay, so it looks like Diet of Worms, but no, I am really not talking about people like only eating worms, okay? It's a meeting. And at the Diet of Worms, he actually gives Luther a chance to recant his statement. So he tells him, look, you need to renounce your beliefs. What you're saying is not true. You don't realize that what you're saying is not true. Just go ahead and take it back. Luther does not back down, though. A month later, Charles V, he ends up issuing the Edict of Worms, okay? And in this edict, Luther he's declared an outlaw and a heretic. And there's no one in the Holy Roman Empire that is supposed to give him aid of any kind. No food, no shelter, nothing. As well as him being outlawed and considered a heretic. All of his writings and books and everything are to be burned, and they are to never be printed or sold again. So he made a really big stink out of things. Well, let's take a look at what happens after these punishments come down. So after the punishments are declared, Frederick the Wise of Saxony, it's part of the Holy Roman Empire, Saxony is, he ends up taking Martin Luther in. And what he does is he provides him shelter in one of his castles, and this is going to be where Luther continues to translate the Bible, specifically the New Testament, into German. This is going to lead to the start of Protestantism. And so in 1522, Martin Luther ends up returning to Wittenberg, where he was surprised to see that many of his ideas and beliefs were already being practiced. So instead of continuing to criticize the Catholic Church, Luther and his followers begin to, they become a separate religious group, a new denomination, if you will. So this is when we see the birth of the Lutheran Church. And those people who are followers or attend a Lutheran church, they're members of this denomination. It's a smaller branch of Christianity. They are called Lutherans. Some of you may be Lutherans. So here you go. All right, so we see the beginning of the Lutheran Church here. These are basically what it believes. It believes that Christians should be able to understand and interpret the Bible for themselves, which is basically going to eliminate the need for a pope, and why Lutheran priests have much less of a role in the running of the church than the priests do in the Catholic Church. Lutherans also believe that all humans are equal before God. So basically, just because you are the pope, or you are the priest, or you are the minister, that doesn't make you any better than me, just a common peasant, just because of your position in the church. So because they believe that all humans are equal before God, we see a little bit more equality there. All right, so what ends up being the effects of the Reformation here in the German states? So there were numerous effects of the Reformation, but we're only going to look at a couple for right now. What ends up happening is Germany ends up going to war. Well, it's not really Germany, it's the Holy Roman Empire. So peasants and some of the German princes liked Luther and his beliefs, and so they followed him. So other German princes who had stayed loyal to the Pope and to the Catholic Church. So now you've got rulers in one area that are going to disagree. You've got some that want to stay Catholic, you have some that want to go Lutheran. In 1529, the German princes who supported the church basically decided to gang up on those who followed Luther. So the princes who supported Luther, of course, they sign a protest and say, this isn't right, this can't happen. And it's from this protest that we get the term Protestant. Okay, let me see here what's going on with my stuff's not showing up. Where are your words? There we go. Okay. So this is where we get the word Protestant. Remember, if you look here right in the root word, you have protest. Okay. So remember Charles V, he was the one who had excommunicated Luther. He ends up declaring war against the Protestant princes. He wins, but they don't all come back to the Catholic Church, meaning all of the princes in Germany, they do not come back to the Catholic Church. Some of them stay Lutheran, even though they've been defeated. So finally, in 1555, Charles V, he's tired of fighting, and he orders all parties involved, all of the princes, both Catholic and Protestant, to meet in Augsburg. They gather, and finally they all agree that the prince of each area is free to decide the religion of his state. So this agreement is super important, and it's the first effect that you need to have written down in your note. It's known as the Peace of Augsburg. So now the Pope, he's no longer in authority over the German states, but because the Holy Roman Empire encompasses so much of Germany, let me bring up a little map here for you. Okay, so much of this area here. You can see there's Worms right there. There's Wittenberg, which we were talking about with Martin Luther. Because so much of that is part of the Holy Roman Empire, you can see the outline here. The Habsburgs, who are the family in charge of the Holy Roman Empire, they continue to support the Catholic Church. So as a result, Holy Roman Empire ends up losing power and it's weakened. So remember, now these German princes, they can decide what religion their kingdom will be thanks to the Peace of Augsburg. Okay. The 30 Years' War, it's a conflict over religion, land, and power, which started after Ferdinand II, who was the head of the Habsburg family. He closed some Protestant churches in Bohemia, which was an area of the Czech kingdom. Okay. Now, after these churches were closed, of course, the Protestants are going to get upset. They're going to revolt. Ferdinand ends up sending troops in to squash this rebellion and completely get rid of it. And really, there's not that much more that you need to know about that right now. We're going to talk about the 30 Years' War in much more detail later on. So right now, you should have all of your notes on Martin Luther taken. I know that this went through them pretty fast, so if you need to go back and rewind any of them, please do that. Make sure you get your notes in. And I will see you in day 2. You're going to have a second part of this. The second video is going to talk about John Calvin. Okay, so please make sure you have both day 4 videos watched. You've got, this is day 1, and there's also going to be a day 2 video that you'll need to watch as well. Okay, so hit pause, go get a snack, go to the bathroom, do whatever you need to do, and then come back and watch video 2. See you in a bit.